What's going on, everyone? Matt Savoca here from the Awesemo Fantasy Football Channel, and we are back with another breakdown, a divisional breakdown. We are going to go team by team, talk about our expectations, talk about how we're feeling about some of these players as we head into fantasy football draft season. And I'm here to break it down with my favorite analyst here, the same name. That means it's a great double Matt pairing. Matt Gajewski. Follow him at Matt_Gajewski on Twitter. Matt, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm having a lot of fun digging into these divisions, kind of getting into the weeds, seeing what coaches change, which players came in and out of the roster, and trying to at least take a look forward. Today, we're talking AFC North, which is a little trickier. It's one of the better divisions in football, but I honestly like that, and I think it'll be a competitive division throughout.
Oh man, I would be shocked if it wasn't a competitive division. We're going to go with the by win totals here, and it is a little bit difficult because one of the teams doesn't have a win total. But when all is said and done, and you just add up all the wins from all the teams in each division, it's very possible that the AFC North may end up with the most overall wins at the end of the season. I'm sure the AFC West has something to say about that when all is said and done here. You ready to dig into this one?
Yeah, I am. I think you're right about that. With the AFC West, they have very tough schedules out of their conference too. So
Yes.
they're beating up on each other. And then they get the NFC West. The AFC North is a little easier. They're going to face the AFC East and the NFC South from their crossover. So I think you're very much spot on that this could be the division with the most wins, getting maybe even three playoff teams with the new structure of the playoffs.
Absolutely, absolutely. We could easily see a division with three. And in some of the sims I've been seeing from some of the sites, even a 2 to 3% chance that we actually see four teams from a division make it into the playoffs. Low probability, but possible. Let's dig into this AFC North. We start with the Cleveland Browns, who do not currently have a win total right now. We probably would slot them in between Pittsburgh, who's at 7.5, and Baltimore at 9.5 if we had a definitive ruling about how many games Deshaun Watson will play. We know Baker Mayfield is going to play exactly 0 games for this Cleveland Browns team, but they have a team that is ready to compete right now. You got to pay up for Deshaun Watson. He's about 106 in ADP right now. How are you feeling about this offense overall? I know they're very run focused. Is that going to change with Deshaun Watson at the helm?
You think it would change a little bit in season to season, even some of the run heaviest, and you could do this for pass heaviest teams as well. They usually regress a little bit. The Ravens were a good example of this last year. They'd been a team historically very, very run heavy, and they just regressed a little bit towards being a pass friendly offense. Not the Buffalo Bills or anything like that, but this is something we can see, and it might not even be something they want to do. It could just be game script related. Maybe they're down in more games than they expect. We mentioned the division they play in, so I think there'll be a little a little pass heavier, particularly if Watson's under center. But like you mentioned, we just don't know that. With the projected win total that you and I mentioned, right around 7 to 9 wins, I think that's fair for them. If Watson suspended the whole season, you're probably going to see Jacoby Brissett at this point. And what do you think their win total would be if you had a full season of Brissett?
In this division,
Yeah, I think
I
you'd
think
probably be right around Pittsburgh, right?
yeah, I'd say 6.5, a little bit lower just because of the competition that they'd face. But as you said, the strength of schedule in terms of ease of schedule for this division is actually it's pretty easy for them. Not to say that, the divisional games will absolutely be tough, but when you get the NFC South, a couple dud teams in there this year, I think you're going to be just fine. But Jacoby Brissett is about the 38th best quarterback in the NFL, and that's why he's paid like one. They're actually very valuable assets to teams when they have a great number one that they're not sure how many games they're going to have them for. Let's get into some of the players that are going early in drafts here. Of course, you got Nick Chubb, one of the most elusive runners in the NFL, one of the just best pure rushers in the NFL. He is 21st in ADP right now, and then there's no one coming off the board until Kareem Hunt at 98th in ADP, and Deshaun Watson not too far after that. Actually, I'm mistaken here. I'm sorry. Amari Cooper, of course, at 43.4 in ADP. Is Amari a good fit here? Is this an obvious wide receiver one situation? We often see league winners come out of this spot in where Amari Cooper is getting drafted, and he could have maybe the best quarterback he's had in his entire career. Arguable, but possible.
Yeah, he took a step back last year, which worries me a little bit coming up in age.
Mhm.
I don't think he's ever truly paid off that draft capital that was invested in him, but he's been a serviceable receiver towards the top in previous seasons. The step back last year was a little concerning, but he did battle through some injuries. There's just no target competition right now. You have Jakeem Grant, you have Donovan Peoples Jones. They invest a third round pick, a late third round pick, it's nearly a fourth rounder in David Bell. You have the former third rounder Anthony Schwartz last year. They lose some tight end production. You re-sign David Njoku. So I just don't see anybody that could possibly compete with Amari Cooper for targets. And maybe this is like a Houston Texans Brandon Cook situation where, yeah, we don't love the offense. They're probably going to be skewed towards the run, but they don't have anybody else to catch passes. A 30% target share is probably a little rich, but not out of the realm possibility. So I like Cooper. And if we got positive news with Watson, I think he'd shoot up into the 30s for ADP.
And by positive, we mean we have definitive information about
Right,
how
right.
much he's going to play, and it's a significant amount of the season. It's very difficult. We were talking about this a little before the show. We're trying to parse out the fantasy impact of very real world news. We don't want to get into the aspects that we can't control. But if we're talking about how we expect this team to do over the course of the 2022 season, how much Deshaun Watson plays is one of the biggest impact points here. But put some respect on Donovan Peoples-Jones' name. Right now, he is actually one of my highest drafted players in underdog fantasy drafts as we get into best ball season. And obviously, there is some different considerations, some different strategic decisions when we're talking best ball versus fantasy football. I recognize that. I'm not talking about a ton of usability from a week-to-week consistency standpoint this season. But I think DPJ has some big games in him, some Will Fuller-esque games. This is a player who is a huge recruit coming into Michigan, had an up and down career at Michigan, but has actually exceeded draft-based expectations since coming to Cleveland. So I really like DPJ with a possible, the run rate, the amount of passes per game that Cleveland had last year was in the bottom 5 in the NFL. Houston, with Deshaun Watson, last he played, was right around league average. So that's actually a good base rate for me. I think Cleveland pushes towards league average in pass plays per game with Watson at the helm, which makes these passing game options like Cooper and DPJ, I think values both of them at their ADP.
I think you're right. I think you want to take shots on this Cleveland team late. We already know that Amari is going to be a solid value. I like Chubb where he's going to. I'm not trying to overdraft those players. I kind of want to be right in line with the field. I don't think they're make or break players at the position because of certain limitations they have. But if you hit on whoever ends up being the number 2 pass catcher in this Cleveland offense, you could be looking at a lot of value. And for me, I don't necessarily know if it's a receiver. I think David Njoku is a player that could take a step forward. He's been injured a lot, but he's still a very young player. He wasn't even 21 years old when he came into the NFL, and he's the player they re-signed. They only have Harrison Bryant behind him, who I think if you're playing things like the Best Ball Millionaire, one of my favorite tournaments, and you're trying to differentiate, Harrison Bryant could be a player that you look at as well because of the high 12 player personnel rates they're going to use in Cleveland. But like you said, this is a pretty complete team, so they're going to be good, especially if we get 8+ games out of Watson. I mean, the offensive line is solid. They lose J.C. Tretter, but they bring in Ethan Posick, kind of like a journeyman center, to maybe replace him. Maybe you'll see Nick Harris play there. And their defense is solid. I mean, Myles Garrett on the edge. They trade for Chase Winovich. You had Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah playing way above his expectation last year, and they've continually invested in the secondary, not to mention they re-signed Denzel Ward. So the team is good. I don't want to say I hope we get Watson. I mean, for legal standings aside, I would like to see the good football. I obviously don't want a player that deserves to be suspended out there, but if Watson plays, I think this is a good team and a playoff team.
That is well said, and I completely agree with you wholeheartedly. You've mentioned it a few times. I've mentioned it a few times. Let's mention it for real. You see the banner at the bottom of the screen there. We are brought to you today by Underdog Fantasy, who has already begun fantasy draft season in full force by offering the $10 million Best Ball Mania 3 tournament. It's now open. Grand prize of $2 million going to first place, $1 million going to second, $1 million going to the regular season champion. Only $25 to sign up to play. And When you sign up at Underdog, you can use promo code Awesemo to get a first match deposit bonus of up to $100. You can enter this contest. They've got all sorts of player prop contests as well. They've got these rivals tournaments I was checking out with multiple sports. Really, really cool stuff. They've even got USFL bets you can make on Underdog. Check it out today. Truly no better time to get in there. Okay, Matt, let's continue on with our divisional breakdown with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who find themselves in unfamiliar territory. First of all, they got a quarterback controversy for the first time in, I don't know, decades. And second of all, they find themselves right now with the lowest win total of any team in this division with a win total. They've kept some continuity in terms of head coach. They've got a new GM coming in. They're still doing interviews for that. Matt Canada, their offensive coordinator, been there since 2021, but this offense is sort of in a shift. Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky going to have a legitimate controversy, not controversy, but competition for this quarterback job. Do you think these players, these skill position players, obviously Najee Harris will be outside of him, will they be fantasy relevant? Do we want to draft them this year?
I think we do want to take some stabs. Just looking back last year, I wouldn't consider Ben Roethlisberger an upgrade on any of the quarterbacks they currently have on their roster. And it's a team that won 9 games. I mean, they made the playoffs. They were kind of a lame duck in that situation, but they did make the playoffs. So there's that. Not to mention, they do throw the ball quite a bit, and they play fairly up-tempo. For a team that was using Roethlisberger, that kind of surprised me. You'd think that style team is going to slow it down, try to use Najee Harris, and they did do that, but a lot of his volume came in the pass game as well. So I think there is opportunity for a few players going late on this team, like Deontay Johnson's going to go a little early, but then Claypool, he's a guy they've used intermittently. At times last year, he was playing 50% of the snaps. Then he'd shoot up to a full-time role, which was a little confusing to navigate. But because of the players they lost, James Washington, Juju Smith-Schuster, Ray McLeod, I don't really think they have an alternative but to play Chase Claypool a full complement of the snaps. Mm-hmm. But like you said, it's a team in transition. You had pieces coming and going on the offensive line, coming and going on defense. It's going to be tough to evaluate this team, and I think they're in the midst of a full rebuild right now.
Yeah. Do they want to admit they're in a full rebuild? Maybe their division will tell them they are in a full rebuild, but they absolutely have talent on the outside. Deontay Johnson is a very, very skilled wide receiver. You can say all you want about drops and whatnot and concentration plays, but Deontay Johnson can get open, and getting open in the NFL is one of the rarest skills there are. I think he's a value at 35.8 in the Underdog ADP right now. My current highest drafted player, it's George Pickens. We have a history of the previous GM of Pittsburgh, again, on their way out this year, just nailing it at the mid-rounds at the wide receiver position. George Pickens, despite that absolutely bizarre video that came out of him watching the TV as he got drafted, I think he's going to get ample playing time because, as you said, they just have to get these 3 big wide receivers on their team a full complement of stats. That's Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, George Pickens. Second-year tight end Pat Freiermuth will absolutely be involved. But the belle of the ball right now, first-round pick, Najee Harris. Are you willing to take your first-round pick and use it on Harris despite this team having so-so expectations?
Yeah, I think so. It comes down to volume, and Harris has better volume than anyone outside of a healthy Christian McCaffrey. He has better volume than Jonathan Taylor because of his role in the receiving game. Now, he's not as efficient as Jonathan Taylor, and that's why we're continuing to draft Taylor way ahead of him. Mm-hmm. But you could argue that Harris has the best role in all of fantasy football, even though that won't come with the most efficiency.
Mm-hmm. And you never know. There's always that point when a bad offensive line, a team that's been hovering around the bottom 5, finally begins to make its way up, not towards the top of the league, but at least towards league average, which in turn pushes the efficiency of all running backs, including one that's getting as much opportunity as Harris. We keep it moving here with the Baltimore Ravens, who are next with a 9.5 win total. But before we get into this one, just want to make sure you guys like and subscribe this channel. This really, really helps us out so that we keep popping up in these YouTube algorithms recommendations as we get you guys ready for fantasy football draft season 2022 while mixing in some of our best ball takes as well. We've even got a brand new Awesemo Best Ball YouTube channel, specifically designed to help you take down these large tournaments and leagues on Underdog and other sites like DraftKings and FanDuel that you know and love. So make sure to subscribe to not just this channel, but the Awesemo Best Ball channel as well. And while you're at it, go over to Twitter, give my buddy Matt a follow, Matt_Gajewski, and I am at Draftaholic on Twitter as well. To the Ravens, Matt, 9.5 wins as a win total. Don Martindale, their DC, and the Ravens parted ways after 2021. He's now with the Giants. That's Wink Martindale to those who know him. That's right. And but we still got Harbaugh at the helm. Greg Roman as an OC, same as 2019. Lamar Jackson still looking to return to MVP form after a couple years where everything just kind of fell apart last year. But basically, you can say this team just hasn't fit into place over the last 2 seasons. It could definitely happen this year, though.
Yeah, I think they're trying to go back to their run-heavy ways. I actually like this win total. I haven't really liked many overs so far. And if I was betting the Steelers, I would certainly take the under on their 7.5. The Ravens are playing a last place schedule in this division because of the Lamar Jackson injury. They finished last in this division, which is kind of crazy to look at. And that was at a record of 8-9. So a pretty competitive roster that's now going to be playing a last place schedule. Conversely, of the Steelers, like they're playing a second place schedule. So in their one-off games against the NFC East, I mean, that's a good opponent. AFC West, you're going to get the Raiders. AFC South, you're going to get the Colts. Meanwhile, the Ravens are getting some of the worst teams across the NFL because of their finish. Yeah. And the Ravens also aren't traveling a lot. They're 30th in overall travel miles this year, playing mostly within their own time zone. So you like to see that for the Ravens. Not to mention the roster. Just getting back a healthy Lamar Jackson is going to be huge for this team. They don't have too many exiting pieces, at least of consequence. The main one's going to be Marquise Brown. And that's my question for you is what do you think the offense does without such a key playmaker in this offense?
You're just looking at the roster. The real answer is run, and run again. That's what they are going to do. That's what they want to do. They are going to run J.K. Dobbins. They're going to run Gus Edwards, who both missed the entire season last year. They also still have Justice Hill sitting on the roster as well. I know they brought in some more backs as well. Tyler Batty as well in the 5th round. But Lamar Jackson not being in the lineup completely hamstrings what this team wants to do. Huntley actually filled in fairly well, respectably well, but if there was any one singular strategy for betting futures for team, I wish there was one strategy that ruled them all, but it would be one that has limited roster turnover and are getting an influx of talent simply based on young players returning from injury or returning to healthy form. And this team fits the bill in a huge way because they did so. They had injury problems at the running back position and at the cornerback position. These are 2 positions of major strength where they hope to outpace other teams. They actually were deficient at that, and they still ended up 8-9. I like them as a Super Bowl bet right now. Early in the offseason, you could get them as plus 2,000 to win the Super Bowl. The odds have changed a little bit right now, but I think there could be some fantasy goodness here. Any last words? Any other than Rashad Bateman, who I think is a good value at 60.9 in ADP. Are you taking chances on Wallace, Duvernay, James Prochet? I mean, Mark Andrews, obviously, you're going to have to pay a premium, but anybody else in the, 2nd, 3rd, 4th receiver situation for them?
Yeah, I think you should be taking stabs on these guys in large fields like the Best Ball Millionaire. Rashad Bateman, their former 1st-round pick, was banged up for parts of last year. When he came back, he was efficient, but he's just one player. And I think one of these guys is likely going to step up for some sort of role. And then if Bateman were to go down, you still need a target leader outside Andrews. So Tylan Wallace, Duvernay, I think these guys in the last round of your drafts has some value. I like Edwards where he is going. When we last saw Dobbins and Edwards play together, the volume wasn't all that different. Edwards wasn't seeing quite as many targets and carries, but he's right there. So I like him as a late round option. And to your point, like this team is pretty complete. On the offensive line, they're not losing much. They lose Bozeman and Villanueva, but they draft Linderbaum early, the center out of Iowa, and they took stabs on tackle late. They took both Bernard Raymond out of Central Michigan and Daniel Falele, this 6'8" mountain of a man from Minnesota.
That man is giant.
Yeah, he's crazy. And I live in Wisconsin, so I got to see a lot of this guy. And on defense, you mentioned it. They lose a couple names in like Jimmy Smith and Tavon Young, but they were so deep at corner to begin with. They still have Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey. They draft Kyle Hamilton very early from Notre Dame. The defensive line is also a solid unit. You have Odafe Owe, who produced at the end of last year in the 1st round. Not to mention they were able to take some luxury picks like a David Ojabo. They got Calais Campbell re-signed. That's a pretty complete roster if they can just get a healthy Lamar Jackson. And not to mention, when the Ravens were previously very run heavy, that opened up efficiency for Lamar Jackson. It just kind of changed the way defenses had to play him. When you're using him in the run game, you can't have corners turning your backs in man coverage. Otherwise, Lamar Jackson's going to gash you. So I'm kind of excited for a return to a run heavier approach for Jackson. I think it could benefit the Ravens as a whole.
Yeah, and my last words about these teams is this is one of the few teams where I'm actually looking at the late round running backs, and I'm okay stacking even in these best ball tournaments with Lamar Jackson, because these rushing game stacks have different correlations for the Ravens than they do with the rest of the league, simply because their offense looks so different. So Mike Davis, I don't know what his role is going to be. He's free in best ball drafts. I'll take a chance on him, whereas I won't take a chance on other veteran running back threes who might have one usable week. Same with Gus Edwards. Even Justice Hill right now, still on the roster, may end up not being on the roster. But these running backs late in drafts are interesting to me because of the Baltimore offense. Okay, this is pretty fun here because the Cincinnati Bengals had a season to remember. They have a young offensive core, part of the LSU Tigers core that continues to dominate in the NFL. That looks like they can continue to dominate for years to come, but they have a really tough schedule, a really high win total that I'm very tempted to bet the under on, and some fantasy expectations. If you're just looking at ADP, this is a really tough team to decipher, not because of the talent, but because of what you have to actually spend in terms of draft capital to get these players. Is there anybody that sticks out in terms of ADP that you're just not touching because the price is too high?
I don't think so. I think they're all pretty fair. If I had to pick one, honestly, it'd be Burrow, just because of the quarterbacks I think you can get later than him and how much he actually overachieved last year. You look at touchdown rate, yards per attempt, they were very unsustainable. And it's even more impressive that he did that with the offensive line he played behind. But that's still not even numbers you see from Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers. So I think there's a little negative regression for him. But overall, I think most of the offensive players are pretty solid values and draftable where they're coming off the board. Do you agree?
Joe Mixon and Joe Burrow, the Joes, are the ones that make me nervous. Joe Mixon, just in terms of ability to stay healthy, I know his workload is going to be there, but he might have actually hit that age threshold that makes me a little bit nervous. Not as old as I thought he was going into this season, but again, we're talking about players that you have to pay absolute premiums for because of the way they finish down the stretch. I actually see Joe Burrow as a slight value quarterback if you look at the overall field, but then look at his draft capital needed. It just doesn't make sense for me. I'll take him when he falls below his ADP in drafts, but that's really the only time I'm looking to go there. If I get Jamar Chase early or T. Higgins early, then maybe I'll keep Joe Burrow at ADP so I can try to get the stack going, because it's not like this stack is going to be suddenly bad. And because their division is so good and offensive focus, they're probably going to find themselves in plenty of pass-based shootouts, even if their win total suffers ultimately here. To me, I think Tyler Boyd is a really interesting play because he's going to be on the field constantly. We know this team wants to pass all the time, and we know that defenses are going to get wiser to these two young receivers in T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Not that they're not going to be able to do their thing. Tyler Boyd at 114 in ADP, what do you say there? Like, he's going to be one of my highest owned players this year.
Yeah, I think he's fine. You're getting him at a much better price than last year with some of the uncertainty we had in the offense. Chase coming in, all the beat reporters talking about how his drops were going to affect him, really pushed Tyler Boyd up the board. And ultimately, he was the pure wide receiver 3. Now, in this offense, similar to situations like Tampa Bay, Buffalo, he certainly has value at that place. I'm comfortable taking him, and he'll be a guy I'm trying to stack with Burrow when he falls and when I miss on some of the other better players like a T. Higgins or a Jamar Chase. I also think Hayden Hurst is somebody we should mention as that last kind of late round stacking option with Burrow. He fits the late tight end profile. And we saw Joe Burrow elevate CJ Uzoma last year. So Hayden Hurst has much higher draft capital than Uzoma, and I presume more talent for that reason. He's somebody I think we could see take a step forward after he disappointed a little bit last year.
That's actually a really good point. And we saw multiple times during the season when teams were trying to take away the pass on the outside that they were comfortable using their tight end in clutch situations. I was actually looking at some film early in the season. They played Jacksonville. They had a crucial play. I believe it was in overtime. It was an ugly early game, I believe a Thursday night. But they go to Uzoma for a game-breaking play that ultimately won them that game against the Jaguars. And I think Hayden Hurst is as good a receiver, if not better, and he's essentially free in best ball drafts. I want to mention one thing too. Despite this schedule being tough, I don't want that to make people think that we're shying away from these players. We're just saying that the ADP is high and you just have to be comfortable paying it, because in terms of usable weeks, a stat I look at for best ball especially, there is no team right now with more expected usable weeks at the flex position, because Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase are going to end up in your fantasy lineups, whether you're starting them or you're playing best ball. I'm really excited about this offense long term. Any last words about Cincinnati and how you think they could stack up? Could they actually make it to another Super Bowl this year?
I don't think they're going to make it to a Super Bowl. I like the under on their win total. I think if you just look at the rosters in this division, you have solid rosters across the board, and on defense specifically, I think they have the worst defense. Look at their defensive line. They lost Larry Ogunjobi. He's going to be a big clogger for them up front. They replaced him with Zachary Clark in the draft. I mean, BJ Hill, Sam Hubbard, Trey Hendrickson, these are solid players, but they're still not at the calibers like your TJ Watt or Odafe Oweh, some of the other players in this division. And on the back end, I didn't like that they spent such premium draft capital on safety. They took 2 safeties in the top 100 picks when they had needs across the board. Like, you're going to go into this season with some combination of Chidobe Awuzie, Eli Apple, Trey Flowers, and Mike Hilton as your top 3 corners.
They're like
a really tough. Yeah, like a tough division. And I know some of these players, even Von Bell's a cast off at safety. And maybe one of the rookies, Daxton Hill or Cam Taylor-Britt, plays ahead of him. But you got a rough secondary there. And they did overachieve last year. As we've seen time over time, that doesn't always stick. So I'm a little worried about this defense. For fantasy purposes, it'd be great for Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Boyd, and Burrow. But for real life, I think the under's the play on the win total.
That's actually a great point, is if they underachieve as a team, they might actually find themselves in negative game scripts, which means they're passing more, which actually might help them from a fantasy perspective. And they have that contract standoff with Jesse Bates brewing as well, I should mention.
He's their best player on defense by far.
Yeah, exactly. So they need to figure that out first and foremost. Matt, this was super fun. I'm super glad we're getting into this point of the season where we can figure out what teams are or what they aren't, and we can actually start to make some realistic expectations for this team. This is one of the most exciting divisions in football. If I had to ask you, who comes out the division champion, one word or one team answer, who is it for you?
Baltimore Ravens. It's that easy schedule and complete roster, getting back a lot of players from injuries.
Me too. And I think you can actually bet them to win the conference. I think the conference winner is out of Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes. To me, that's where one of those 4 teams is taking the AFC crown this year. This has been a lot of fun, Matt. We will be back with division coverages, breaking it down with every single team as we take you through fantasy football draft season. He's Matt Gajewski. Follow him at Matt_Gajewski. I'm Matt Savoca at Draftaholic. We will be back soon enough on the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel. We'll see you guys later.